Hi, this is Val. This is now my 10th time trying to film this video. And I think I'm just going to dive into it because I had this whole intro planned, and every time I try to do this intro, I just freeze up. Um, I'm kind of the type of person that needs a script to like make a simple phone call. So this is like this whole experience of videotaping me doing this stuff is like really blowing my mind. And but I do really like the low definition on this camera because I don't think I've looked this good in years. It's kind of like that, those old TV shows where they would switch the camera to just a close up of the actress, but they would put like this sort of haze over the camera when they landed on the actress's face. So it'd be like they smeared mayonnaise over the camera or something, and so she would always look like super radiant and beautiful without any wrinkles or anything like that. That's what this camera on my old Mac feels like to me. I really like, I don't need HD or anything like that. This is great. I'm really enjoying this. So anyway, I thought today I would talk about my background in the entertainment industry, specifically mostly comic books and comic book related media. Readers of my blog Butterfly Language might be expecting somewhat more esoteric ramblings, and I do assure you the esoteric ramblings are coming. I'm just trying to be savvy about them because, as you may or may not know, certain esoteric slash fringe terms used in a YouTube video sort of set off this algorithm in YouTube. Well, they'll run like a Wikipedia article like directly under your video, debunking everything you say. Basically, like it's basically a disclaimer under the video that YouTube runs saying that basically this person who's speaking on this video now is a complete lunatic, and don't listen to anything they're saying. And I find that really awkward. And also, I don't want to be demonetized, though to be fair, I don't even know if I'm monetized. But I know if I was monetized, I would not want to be demonetized. But that said, I do have esoteric ramblings planned for the future, and they will probably weave in and out of some of these videos and narratives I'm doing. The other thing is that, basically talking about comic books and related stuff is kind of low-hanging fruit. It's sort of like, you put those keywords in there, and one of my commenters, who's also a supporter of me on a Patreon, link in the description box, had said that the keywords I had used for the last video basically set off all these ElsaGate recommended videos on his feed, which is really great because that's exactly what I wanted, because now I'm going to be rich. Because if I can crack that ElsaGate nut, I will be super rich, and that would be great. So, and in case you don't know what ElsaGate is, it's basically, you've probably heard of this, it's those videos that's just like people dressed as Spider-Man and Elsa from Frozen and the Joker and all these different characters just doing really weird stuff. Like the videos where like Spider-Man is pregnant and Elsa, is being tortured by the Joker in the dentist chair and stuff like that. Those videos that end up on like the children's YouTube app. Yeah, that's they call it ElsaGate. So apparently, my particular mix of keywords were setting that off. And that's, I do have to apologize for that, but that wasn't my intention, but it did happen, and I will apologize for it. I apologize. But anyway, yeah, talking about comics and comic-related toys and stuff like that, very low-hanging fruit. So I might as well just give it a shot. So anyways, yeah, comic books. I started reading comic books really young. I read the first Teen Titans from the 1980s. I guess it was called the New Teen Titans. I read the first issue off the stands when it came out. When I was really small, like really young, like I was like minus 12 years old when I read that. I was not even born yet, and so that was pretty amazing that I was able to do that. But yeah, I started with New Teen Titans and Batman, of course. Then I moved over my adolescence to like the X-Men family of comics, and there were many of them. New Mutants and X Factor and the Fallen Angels and the Son of the Mutants and Welcome Back Cotter's X-Men Mutant Tribe and all those different comics that we all grew up with and loved. I read those. And I even sent in my name and address to Marvel Age, which was Marvel's fan comic, so I could get pen pals. And that was like the biggest, proudest day of my life, to have my name and my address in Marvel Age. I was getting pen pals, and then my mom started intercepting a bunch of these pen pal letters, and then I suddenly never got any pen pal letters ever again from anyone. And that was the end of my pen pal career. But it was fun while it lasted. Anyway, so I love the X-Men. I sort of moved from the X-Men to like the DC comics of like, the Justice League International, sort of the Justice League humor comic and stuff like that. And then I went into more independent comics as I got older. Was big reading Love and Rockets. And of course, like Vertigo titles, like Animal Man and Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol. And so I was just always loved comic books, and I always wanted to work in the comic book industry. And I had even written, when I was like around 13 years old, I tried out to become a Marvel intern. And I got a call back. Like I wrote a letter, and they called me, and they said, oh yeah, and it was going really well. We were talking on the phone and stuff. And then they asked me how old I was. And I was like, I'm 13. And I was like, all right, kid, go back out there in the world and learn more things and then come back. Which I did. And that's later in the story. But so yeah, I have always liked comic books. And then I was working in the PR office of my college, and I was on a what do you call it? Like a doctorate track and stuff like that for English Lit. And my office, they had a woman working who was dating the president of a comic book company called Acclaim Comics, which you might know Acclaim Comics from like Valiant Comics. It was originally Valiant Comics, and then Acclaim, the video game company, bought it, and then it was called Acclaim Comics. And so I got an interview, like right when I was about to graduate college, I got an interview with Acclaim Comics, and I got offered a job as an assistant editor. And there I worked on books like all the Disney titles, and then moved on to Shadow Man and Magnus Robot Fighter and Master Dark. We did that for a few years. Then Acclaim sort of had an implosion in '98, and they let go of most of their staff. And so then I went to find a real job, which I would recommend that if you do want to be in the comic book industry, in whatever capacity, you should take some years to like learn regular real job type skills. Definitely. Like just basics, like pick something like marketing, advertising, graphic design, coding, whatever. It is good to learn a skill because I think especially now it's becoming harder and harder to really make a living doing this stuff. So I never regretted taking time out to learn some advertising and marketing skills. Not at all. But then, like a few years into advertising and marketing, I sent a bunch of cold letters cold call letters to DC, and I got called in to interview with a bunch of people there, and I got hired as an assistant in their creative services department with one of the art directors, and I was mostly in charge of like the covers for the DC comics. Like most of the covers, unless they were Vertigo, I think, went through our office. I worked with Adam Hughes on the Wonder Woman covers personally. And then slowly I got to move from just creative services assistant to assistant editor. And then I assisted on such books as like a whole slate of Darwin Cook stuff, Selena's Big Score, Batman Ego, The New Frontier. I assisted on Batman Black and White. Then I assisted on Justice League. No small shakes. Aquaman, Supergirl. I did a few issues of Legion of the Superheroes. And then the two comics that I had edited myself were Arkham Asylum, Living Hell, and Human Defense Corps, which you probably have never heard of Human Defense Corps, but that was a very interesting book, and that'll be a separate video one day maybe. But those are the two books I edited myself. And then the last book that I worked on was a miniseries you might have heard of called Identity Crisis. And it was the last issue I worked on for really good reason. And it, now I'm going to get into more of the esoteric stuff. It was very interesting how the subject matter for Identity Crisis sort of just wove in and out of my life, my working life. And that's something I find a lot, that there's like a sort of parallel quality sometimes, especially like when you're an editor and you're, or a writer, but especially an editor, because you're seeing, you have so many books come through your desk that you start to notice sometimes there's similarities in the stories you're working on and stuff going on in your life. And that's definitely one of the topics I write a lot about on Butterfly Language. That sort of intersection of how your life goes on and the stuff you're working on, you know, like fictional stuff seems to sort of weirdly reflect your life and vice versa. And so, yeah, that Identity Crisis was, I think, my last comic at DC. And then I started blogging about comics, and then I started, you know, getting writing work, writing comics, but in between that, I sort of like, in between my past comics editing experience and then me becoming a comic book writer, you know, the sort of creamy white filling of that was basically I was blogging about the comic industry, and I was just sort of keeping things real. I was blogging about my life in the comic industry on a blog called Occasional Superheroine, and I sort of branded myself as like a cartoon character, which it gets into really weird stuff. In my blog, I have a post called "My Life is a Hypersigil." I'll include a link to that in the description box. But basically, there's the Grant Morrison concept of hypersigils, and that you can use comic writing or comic iconography or any sort of pop cultural iconography to it sort of intersects with your personal life. Like it's a sort of this weird sort of intersection. And basically what I had done is I kind of created a comic book version of myself on my blog. And I hired like an actual Archie Comics artist to draw it. And it looked like an Archie Comics character. And then I really sort of found myself in this weird liminal career state where I was getting hired to write stuff, but I was getting hired sort of like for my character to write stuff. There was one comic called Munden's Bar, which is an anthology series that comic mix put out, and I remember I was just basically showed up as me in that comic. And stuff like that, like very odd. And so when Marvel asked me to write a Punisher one-shot, it just seemed a natural thing to carry on that whole theme, more or less. And I wouldn't recommend it. I would say from my experience, I wouldn't recommend you trying that, because it gets really, really weird. Especially since the whole conceit of the Punisher one-shot was that it had to be about a woman. I couldn't write about the Punisher himself. I had to write about a female character that I created. It was kind of like me. So already, this is getting in weird territory, okay? So, and the caveat of this great opportunity I had to write the Punisher was that the character I created, who was kind of based on me, would be killed off by the Punisher at the end of the issue. And that sounded, at the time, it was like, oh, okay, that's really great. So if you're carrying now going back to the Grant Morrison idea of hypersigils, and oneself as a hypersigil, you can see how this was a really big problem and a real pile of doo-doo I put myself into in this arrangement, because basically I was asked to create a character that was an avatar of myself, and this character would be dead at the end of the issue, killed by the main character of the series. That's hilarious. Now I just think it's hilarious. So this is the comic right here. This is, right, left. This is the comic right here, Punisher Max Butterfly. I think in the one of the collected Punisher Max editions, it's called Punisher Max, the Butterfly Effect. But yeah, this is and my butterfly language. Oh, that's right. I named my blog Butterfly Language. How about that? But readers of Butterfly Language will probably note the iconography here and stuff, and that's a separate conversation we'll have later when I find how to sort of finesse the whole esoteric stuff without getting demonetized, if I really am monetized to begin with, and that's a whole separate thing. But anyway, yeah, so this is the comic, and yeah, I did that comic, and a lot of readers were angry that a woman even went near the Punisher. And even though I never really wrote the character, I had to write the female avatar. And I got a lot of abuse about it online. And I got threats of violence and death threats. And I remember Marvel calling me the morning that the book was going to drop in the comic stores. So it was I think a Wednesday. It was an early Wednesday morning. And I mean, it might have been earlier than 9 o'clock. My editor called me really early. And I'm already thinking, oh, geez, what's going on here? Called me and said, I'm just calling to warn you that there seems to be some negative reaction to your comic book out there. And just, hang in there, kid. And goodbye. And literally, that was the phone call I got from Marvel. And then it was just yeah, it was so funny. It was just, people didn't even need to read the comic because they knew right off the bat that it was bad. Because how could it not be bad? Some female blogger was writing it, and it had to be terrible. So that happened, and I stopped going to conventions because I was afraid violence was going to happen to me. And then later, Marvel hired, as a writer, one of the people who had sort of spearheaded the initial sort of online harassment against me. So that was a sort of the frosting on the cake. It was sort of I felt I walked into a situation. Do you know what I mean? When mobsters talk about like I walked into a situation. I feel like I walked into a situation, where it was like I walked in as the icon of the female blogger at that time that, all these sort of like proto Comicsgate people love to hate. And I was the avatar served up by Marvel in this Punisher comic to be murdered at the end of the issue by the Punisher. I mean, it was actually like, when I think about it now, it was quite genius. And I do, it does give me a chuckle, but that's what happened with that. And so, yeah, I stopped going to conventions because I just thought like violence would happen to me there, because, it's sort of like, I freaked myself out because I'm like, now my avatars in this comic get shot dead by the Punisher at the end of the comic. Now I'm getting threats of violence and death and this and that. I'm like putting like 2 and 2 and 4 and 6 and 8 and 16,000 together. And I'm like, oh, this is bad. This is a bad situation. So I just sort of like ended up laying low after that. And then like a couple years after that, I got offered a job at MTV.com to edit a new pop culture comic book site that they were launching called MTV Geek. And so I kind of got back into the comics industry, but just through through the media. And that was a completely different experience. And though I wrote stuff for MTV Geek, I mean, most of the stuff I did was behind the scenes pretty much. And I, like between all my experience and between working for Acclaim Comics and DC Comics, Marvel Comics, and then MTV, you just get so much insight on not just the comic book industry, but just like movie industry, media industry, everything. And so regardless of the twists and turns of my experiences and all that, I mean, the experiences themselves and the insights they provided were like gold. It was just like, so when I see things like this, like the Zack Snyder stuff, that like it's sort of controversy. I mean, first about Justice League, and then he's off the Justice League movie, and they put Joss Whedon on, and the Justice movie kind of sucks, and then there's a Zack Snyder director's cut, and people hate Zack Snyder, and people love Zack Snyder, and all this sort of stuff. People are like talking about it back and forth, back and forth. I have like an added sort of perspective to that stuff because I worked in the industry, and I was working at DC at a time, like a very crucial time, where they consciously wanted to be more like Marvel and to kind of cast off any sort of happy image they had. And literally, I went to an editor's retreat where that was the mission. And that's where Identity Crisis, the comic book, was literally born at that retreat. And it was specifically created to compete with Marvel. And they wanted something dark. And so the concept of Identity Crisis was created there. And everything cinematically that DC related that came after that was influenced by this new direction. I mean, that all being said, and maybe I'll do another video on this later, I had no problem I don't have a problem with Zack Snyder. I think Watchmen is one of my favorite movies. It was supposedly an unfilmable graphic novel, and I think, he rendered it filmable and powerful and memorable. And I think the problem with Zack Snyder, the DCU movies, is that they said they wanted something dark, and they said they wanted to have this dark, gritty stuff, but it's just not going to sell Happy Meal toys. It's just not going to sell Happy Meal toys. It's kind of like the whole Tim Burton Batman Returns thing all over again. So they say, we're going to make this dark. This is not your parents' Superman. Everything is dark, but they're not. But they didn't. I don't feel they fully threw their weight behind it. And I really got that even from like Man of Steel. There was just it always, these movies always felt like they're kind of fucked with, you know? And that happens a lot. I mean, these movies do get fucked with. Like Green Lantern. The Green Lantern movie is a good example. Green Lantern, I can see the bone structure of a good movie within Green Lantern. But you can also see the fingerprints of 1,000 cooks from every department interfering with that movie and turning it into a mess. And I definitely saw those types of fingerprints with the Zack Snyder DC films. And I think by the time you got to Justice League, it was sort of like, I mean, I almost feel like that movie was intentionally sabotaged to just kill the entire Snyderverse completely. I think it was completely sabotaged. Because you have that first scene in Justice League of like Superman on that camera phone or whatever, camera phone. This, you know, but that image of him, and it's supposed to be very realistic. So, and it's, the first scenes are like this focusing on his face, and you have Henry Cavill with this really bad CGI on his mouth, like he has a hair lip or something. And it's the first thing you focus on in this movie is that bad CGI. And you can't tell me that this, like, the people like approved this stuff and knew this was going to be, I didn't know this was going to be a complete disaster. So, but because I kind of have that extra context, sometimes when I read these stories or hear about these stories, like, there's always a little bit, I kind of interpret it one step beyond or something, you know, like I just sort of like I remember working at DC and we went into a conference room and there were books all around. They were style guides for the Catwoman movie with Halle Berry. And so these style guides, I don't know if you've ever seen them. If you ever worked in the industry, you've seen stuff like this. It's basically these books that they send out to all the licensors, or licensors, you know, the people who make the toys and the shirts and all the merchandise. And it has like style guide art and a Bible, like a story Bible. And then it has like, and this, for Catwoman, it had all these swatches of like different fabrics, these different pattern fabrics. And I remember just looking at, you know, the style guy, and I was like, this movie is going to bomb. Like, they're focused on the wrong things about this movie. And I just looked at this style guide. It was just swatches of these different fabrics sewn into the book. And I was just like, yeah, this is not going to work out. So anyway, yeah, so where was I? Oh, right, MTV. So yeah, MTV Geek. And then along the way, I've written a bunch of other comics for independent companies, which I think is like a separate video. But, you know, I would say I've written like 10 comics or 12 comics or something like that. That's like my experience. I mean, I can even say that that's my experience in the comic industry. Because to say my experience in the comic industry would be like, you know, like one of those like 10-hour uploaded videos to YouTube of just like, you know, Patrick the Slug from SpongeBob SquarePants making a face. For me to cover everything would just be humongous. But so I've kind of given you some of the background. And like I said, I don't regret having the experiences that I've had in the comic industry because it's actually taught me a lot. And then when I go back to like other interests I have, like esoteric interests and stuff like that, it's sort of like my personal experiences, my own little microcosm of stuff that I had dealt with and observed. I can see that it ends up being applicable in the macrocosm of things too. Like it's sort of like it was teaching me in detailed form about certain things that, like, when I look at the wider world, I can see those same things, but writ large, with just the world in general. If that makes any sense, and probably doesn't. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, and there's so much more. I mean, there's so many like interesting stories, and there's so many weird anecdotes, like tons and tons of them. And I I'm sure if I actually do upload this video, and I'm not sure if I have to watch it to see if it's something I really want to do. But if I if I do upload this video, um, I hope you like it or it gives you some insight, and I hope to do more in the future. And that's it. Thanks for listening.